Asevele ibumbene insimbi yesithupha lomhla ekuseni lesithathu, just 3 days into the week. We welcome you to the show. A very good morning to you, and thank you for waking up with us again this very good morning. It's been a couple of chilly days, Twombeni, but still we brave the cold as we should.
Yeah.
Babukela ngicabanga ukuthi nabo bavuka kungasiko mnanzi kodwa bafuna lokusibukela, bafuna lokuvalwa ukuthi live la kangwane lithuthuka liyaphi, tinsale tikhona tingakuphi, bafuna kuva ukuthi nje lisathuthuka vele ngitiphi inhlelo letikhona leti khulunyiswa kulethanjiswa ngelitubani bito lami ngisifiso nganxumala ngihamba ngedwa ngihamba nalungelele magagula nalomhla ekuseni lo tangifushisa lencola. Thombeni, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you too. I'm great. I'm
Ngiyabuka
happy.
lokuthi nawugcwele red ngabe wendelele lenkulumo lesitayikhuluma yini lapha
Yeah,
ehlelweni nami.
ngendelele ngikhuluma lamuhla Sifiso njengoba wathi ukuthi njengovetile nje ukuthi kunetinkinga letiningi lapha eveni.
Yeah.
Sikhuluma nga one of those issues lekuyindzaba ye blood donation. Takumla ukuthi saveta indzaba last week ukuthi I blood bank noma ke tibhedlela lapha eveni ditsinga ingadi Sifiso ngoba abantu labanenge khanze ukuthi bangenele ama surgeries noma ke baba netingoti letimoto yokhanze ukuthi sekudzingeka ingadi, so kuyavela lokho ukuthi iyashoda kakhulu lengadi la etibhedlela lokuyinkinga lenkulu, particularly le ngadi blood type lengakavami. So tekule impilo nje lephuma umkhankaso lizama likhuthatha sona sive samaswati ukuthi sivele blood bank noma ke tibhedlela siyonikela ngayo ingadi. So nje on that note sisitabe sinaye blood donor recruiter lo sokhona tekule impilo sifuna kuva ukuthi ngabe vele lesimo sibucaye kanganani njengoba sekuvelele nje ukuthi there is a high demand of blood in hospitals. Sitabe nje sinaye lunga ntshantshali lo sokhona etiko letempilo because vele kahle bank the blood bank can never have enough blood mnguni ngaloko ukuthi ama patients ayithinga njalo every single day. So sitabe sinaye kukhulumisana naye kuva ukuthi ngabe sivele sifise ukudonate ingadi senda kanjani siya kuphi nekuva nje ukuthi le procedure ithatha isikhathi singanani ngokuthi abanye besabatinyalethi mnguni, so kubana lokho kwesaba ukuthi ethi ngidonate ngengadi yami kutawendiwani ngayo kwendekeni. So he'll take us through the procedure ukuthi kwendekani vele kahle uyagula and afterwards kwendekani masoceze ukudonate. So sitabe sinaye lomhla ekuseni.
Yeah, kanzike kukhutsata nje I think ngoba it's an urgent issue wena Thombeni. Sikile sayiveta last week kuthi kakhulu lo blood kuthiwa ngani O+.
O+.
Yeah, uthingeka ngamatubane
negative,
laseTulu. It's quite urgent. Emaswati lamaningi ayawuthinga. So thina lesesikile sa donate before lesichubekako futhi nekudonate. Siyafuna lokusho ukuthi akusiko buhlungu. Futhi nje na usaba tinyalithi, I wouldn't necessarily say tinyalithi leta. Egama letinyalithi lisuke bese seliyathusa ngoba inyalithi wathi ukuthi iyahlabana kubuhlungu. Kude nje indvo lebuhlungu lapha. Futhi ngisho sawudonateile kude lokungakanani lokwentekako. Advisor kahle bayakupha nekudla lokumnanzi lapha, bakuphe netinatho, but I know lo ukuthi bona batasichazela kahle uma befika manje. We do want to talk to this viewer lotawukhanza ukuthi by the time ifika le segment utawube engcenye sekabhizi nalokunye engcenye soyageza solungisela ke emsebenzini. It is painless. The process is quick and fast. Siyacela maswati lamahle isibhedlela lotutane naso uhambe uyawudonate emaswati ayayidzinga ingadi. Ungenteka futhi uyidonate nje udonatela wena ngoba awadi impilo is very inevitable. Yeah, kwana nawe ungathikhanza so usengotini yemoto, God forbid kutele ngimfisela lokho, but nje kwathikhanza ukuthi soyayidzinga leyo ngadi. So ufika ibhanga ukhanza ukuthi khona lo wake wayidonate lokhanza ukuthi ibekiwe. So yakhona ukukusita. Kunalabanye ke labagula banabo anemia nanabo khanza ukuthi bayayidzinga nesihlobo sakho singayidzinga, maybe without kuva ngathi I'm guilt tripping people. Kusitana nje simaswati siyakudzinga noma ngakusihlobo noma ngakusasuwe. The loss of a life akuhlale kuvele kubuhlungu ukushaqisa lokho. Siyacela maswati lamahle siyagcizelela asambeni siyawudonate ingadi.
Yeah, and of course another guest team going to sina nebaka Eswatini Electricity Company. Good news, sikhonela kufika ku100%. Takumela ukuthi basukumisa lihlelo le TID rollover lapho beli kuphocelela ukuthi reset ema meters isike inkampani sevetile ukuthi sife samaswati sesicomplyile before the deadline, which was November 2024. Onke ema prepaid meters la ngetolo kwa 28,000 seka resetiwe. We'll be speaking to Khaya Mavuso wayo inkampani Eswatini Electricity Company kuvuka ukuthi ngabe vele mhlambe leti nguquko leti ngabe de shop thina ngoba kube netikhalo kubo social media ukuthi labo laseba resetile kwanga ngathi lama units sekagijima kakhulu sifuna kuve manga namaqiniso aleyenza ukuthi ngabe vele mhlawumbe nabe so resethile ma units ahamba kanjani
enda njani la wakho mfowethu la wakho enda njani
no sesitava ngabo ebochwephesha laba ka AEC kuva ukuthi vele manga namaqiniso lendzaba lena athini so to stay with us for the program ngomanje asibuke na dile thamba imbili kumaphepha ndzaba. All right, silethamba imbili sawubuka i-Times of Eswatini lomhla. Thamba imbili wanted ex-warder who fled during unrest tells it all. He reveals who recruited him, how they committed crimes which resulted in death of some members of the public. You can read more on page 2. Thamba imbili, the king has dispersed a regiment and also shared memories of King Eswatini Itolo. In other news, punishment of political civil servants to Koswa disagrees. Thamba imbili, business woman held for molesting a 6-year-old who is her son. Hamba imbili, Kauzela worshipped at Swalimo, Sydney, who has recently resigned.
Times of Eswatini this Wednesday morning in Gijima Mbili, high-profile candidate for Sihlangu job speaks. I can take Sihlangu to AFCON. That's according to the United Kingdom coach. This is after forwarding his bid. This English coach has confidence, or rather is confident of steering Eswatini to greater heights. Kune coaching history yakhe lebesena nayo seyiyafakwa kuyo yona le article le. On another story, relegation case drags on. This is a story that speaks to Wanderers that will have to wait longer before knowing their relegation fate after lodging a protest against 3 Denver Sundowns players. Ndzaba yesithathu ikhulumisa i-CAF Champions League lapho khona imbabane Swallows tihloleta khona ke tithi tifuna i-South African Orlando Pirates. Imbabane Swallows fans have expressed their eagerness for their favorite team. Kusi iqhudelana nayo ke iSoweto Giants Orlando Pirates in the CAF Champions League. Kanti ke eNgilandi khona indzaba lehamba embili. Anthony Martial confirms departure from Manchester United.
Right, leading headlines on the Eswatini Observer this Wednesday. King thanks and also disperses Libut. His Majesty King Mswati III, together with King Misizulu Kazwelithini, led Libut for in dancing before dispersing them after the harvesting of Royal Field at Ngabezweni Royal Residence yesterday. In other news, farm dwellers debate 5-year contracts for Montigny dwellers. Contracts renewable, but dwellers claim it's not enough. Popular SA traditional healer visiting local dams. And entertainment news, Snowy returns to the runway.
Eswatini Observer this Wednesday morning, making the leading story is the PLE rules that are defective. Wanderers Sundowns in standoff. Njengoba ke lawo ma-rules lawa defective. Tswake Wesleyans against Zakhele Dlamini representing Sundowns fails to cite rules supporting their protest. Dlamini wants matter dismissed. On another one, Sihlangu's 20-day marathon schedule in upcoming games is out. The national team Sihlangu Semnigat is set to embark on a 20-day back-to-back grueling schedule as they honor their upcoming games. All the best, Makrish, and that's according to Dihlwelege Take. This is the resounding statement from most fans when reacting to Sitvashini United midfielder Richard Makrish's financial windfall, which he received as heartwarming farewell messages from local fans following his switch to Northern Ireland.
On the Eswatini Daily News this Wednesday, Red Cross launches 12 million Malangeni disaster relief project. In other news, the Minister of Home Affairs says ethical conduct will strengthen service delivery. And Gulatini Tamba Mbili co-executor cries foul over exclusion in father's estate.
Kubekela kutemidlalo Eswatini Daily News kungolesithathu lomuhla indzaba gijima embili Premier League relegation saga Manzini Wanderers lose round 1. Hub Giants efforts implicate two Denver Sundowns players failed on Tuesday night when the case started. Now only defender Jaimo Moses case for not having work permit remains as matter continues on Thursday. Indzaba lenye ke lehamba embili sihlangu semnikati to hold mini camp in Durban. Indzaba yekugcina FIFA UEFA must hold Super League opposition.
All right, and that's it for newspaper headlines. It's 10 minutes after 6. Let's take a break. Stawube and Dindzaba Eswatini.
Girl, it's crazy how packed this place is during a live MTN Bushfire festival.
Definitely. Live music, umswengo, cultural exchange, there's so much.
Buning. And the funny thing is, you see those ladies in the back?
Definitely.
Kusile and Bella.
Yeah.
You know, kubalkhuni babona during a live Bushfire festival, but now they seem so close.
They seem so close, but bushfire kuba ngathi bakhashane kakhulu.
This is where it's going down, the belly of the beast and the heart of the fire.
And the beauty of it all is that we will be bringing you all the fire straight into your living room, as it happens the whole weekend.
So, catch the live broadcast of the MTN Bushfire Festival live on Eswatini TV during these times.
So it's Friday from 8 p.m. till 10 p.m., Saturday from 3 p.m. till 5 p.m., and again from 8 p.m. till 10 p.m.
And then we wrap up the entire festival on a Sunday from 3 to 6 p.m.
Are you ready to bring your fire?
Oh, but that's not all, isn't it, Bello?
Nope. This weekend, Eswatini will also be live from here.
Bushfire is back.
So make sure you tune in from the 31st of May to the 2nd of June, right here on Eswatini TV.
Asimze sinemukele sakuvuselana walosanza kusivulela nadidi indzaba. Silo semhlaba sesithumisa umgcumo walacwebetelako nemandla lafakwe libutfo kwenta siciniseko ukuthi avuna kudla lokwanele kuti live litawukhona kudondla lithengisele lamanye emave. Ikakhulukati ngoba bekunetinsolo tesomiso esifundzeni lesisendasi neAfrika. Iphefumula esikolweni ngabezweni nayichitha libutfo lebelivuna emabele emasimo ebukhosi ingonyama ivete nangebumgcoka bekubambisana kwetive kulondvolota yamasiko.
Libutho licale ngekuthi liklamele emkhunjini lingene engomeni yakhe lebe kuyinkomba yokucala kwemsebenzi walelanga ngaphambi kokuthi isilo semhlaba selicithe libutho. Kufika kwayo imbube yemhlaba kuvele kwaletha injabulo nenhlokomalo kilo libutho lemnikati. Lokhu kulandzela kufika emaphethelweni kwemsebenzi wekuvuna emabele emasimini ebukhosi. Libutho abelikade liphume ngetinkani libulala inyoka. Lomkhosi lonyaka bekade ungenelwe na inkosi yesive sakaZulu, inkosi imisizulu kaZwelithini. Libutho ligithe umgubho nengwenyama yemaswati kunye nayo inkosi yakaZulu. Silo semhlaba besikathe sisingethwe ngemakhosikazi yesilo, bamva benkhosi, boba betukhulu, ndvunankulu, tindvuna tembuso kanye nalabanye labakhulu embusweni. Ngemuva kokugitha umgubho libutho liholwa imbube yemhlaba libe seligitha incaba kancofula. Silo semhlaba sihloniphe bukhona benkosi yakaZulu ngekuthi libutho lihlabelele liphindze futhi ligize umgubho wakaZulu uyinkosi yohlanga. Kuphetha kugitsa kwelibutho lacwebetelako abese ayagiya. Sesiphefumulela umhlaba silo semhlaba sithe emasiko abandi kungako kumele kubanjiswane kuwagcinane kwalondvolota. Ingwenyama iphindze yadumisa umcumo inhlonipho kanye nokusebenza ngokutimisela noma bekusolo kukhalwa ngesimomiso esifundzeni sasendasini Afrika kodwa libutho libonekele labiya nako kudla.
Ngumnanzi majaha nasinjena njengoba sinjena kukuhle sesihlangene kubonala ukuthi si-Afrika sibambene simunye njengoba namuhla majaha nibusisekile njengoba kulanga lewe ukuthi senakhululeka nengosi silo sakaZulu Mageba ite nelibutho lonke la nalo ukuthi vele itoba kanye nathi nasigidza lomkhosi majaha. Lokhu kwenembala kuhle ngoba silo naso salandzela kuboba bemkhulu njoba nje nasikhumbula emuva emlandweni kukhulunywa ukuthi somhlolo wahamba waya le kaZulu kuyawubona inkosi Shaka yamemukela kahle yabuya inkosi somhlolo langakithi kwaba kuhle kanjalo nalamanye emakhosi nesilo uyise wesilo naye umhlomba bekangapheli lapha kithi sibe naye sigitse naye siyele dansi phansi elibonjeni lapho khona besambe siyofuna leti bonala ukuthi leti bonala ukuthi awutinya amatanumbe sekunjanjanyana bese sesiyabona ukuthi awu lethi ngoba setibulala nanjani athi salethi buya nganeno majaha. Majaha nisebente kahle kakhulu kwaba kuhle kuvuna kwenu konke kubuyile ethafeni kube kuhle sithumisa ngoba lonyaka bekukhalwa ngesomiso kulesigodzi sakethi nje saku region kukhaliwe impela ukuthi awusomiso sivele sahlasela lapha nalapha kuletinye tiganga khona lapha ku region kepha ke sibonga ke uNkulunkulu nemadlodi ukuthi la kithi asikasiboni naku nje njoba seniqala kuvuna la njoba senicedzile kuvuna lapha lapha njoba emfabantu nyaloke seniyavuna kuphuma tonke tigodlo ngaphandle imiphakathi onke emakhaya sekuyawuvunwa kubonalise ukuthi ngilabo nalabo bayawugqoqa kudla ngoba solo sifanele majakwe ukuthi nasigqoqa kudla sibe sinako lokho ukuthi ekugcineni sifuna sibe live lekuyawuthiwa ngalelinye ilanga lakhona kudondla benze lakhona nekuthengiselana lamanye amave majaka.
Inkosi yesive sakaZulu, inkosi imisizulu kaZwelithini, ithe eMaswati namaZulu anemlandvo lobanti. Inkosi yamaZulu yethembise ukuchubeka nekundlondlobalisa lobuhlobo.
Konke lokhu nina bendlovu kuzinkomba ezishoyo ukuthi siyaziqhenya futhi siyalithanda usiko lwethu. Siyakwenqaba namhlanje laba abathi akufananwe, siyakwenqaba lokho singabe ngoni nina besizwe. Ngalamazwi ngizoqinisa isihlalo sakwangwane, ngizoqinisa isizwe njengoba ngazi ukuthi nani ngokunjalo njengesizwe samaSwati esingaphakathi la kwangwane nesingaphandle eMpumalanga bahlonipha kakhulu futhi sibambisene ngoba bazi umlando namasiko esithe sabambisana ngayo eminyakeni endlule. Ngithokoza kakhulu enkosini eyakha lobu buhlobo, ihambe namakhosazane khona lapha eSwatini. Ngithi kwakuwumntana inkosi uThandile owayezalwa isilo uSomhlolo ngaleso sikhathi owahamba wayobona ilembe okuyilesi sihlalo engihlezi kuso namhlanje. Ngizoqinisekisa ukuthi lobo buhlobo namanje busamile futhi buyoma uma ngisaphila futhi nesizukulwane sami masiyaphila siyokwazi ukuthi lolo siko siliqhubekeze, sibambisane, sithekelane, sibhimisane ugwayi ukuthi namasiko ethu nina besilo abambane sibe munye. Ngalamazwi ngithokoza kakhulu, nginikeza udoloqini ukuthi sikanye nani emkhulekweni kubantu abadala abala ekhaya, amakhosi asengasekho nawo amakhosi akwaZulu ukuthi siyobambana njengoba babeshile. Ngalamazwi ngithokoza kakhulu engonyameni yalapha ekhaya, ngithokoze kakhulu ube mhlelo umsebenzi wonke ingathi ningephela mandla butho likandaba. Ngalamazwi ngithi inkosi nibusise, ngiyathokoza wena wendlovu.
Emajaha akhuthatiwe ukuthi ke aqhubeke nenhlonipho nekulondlolodayo emasiko nasemimangweni. Etindzabeni bikapholile Maziya esigodlweni engabezweni.
Ivana ilitiko letinkhundla umhlonishwa Sikhumbuzo Dlamini ithi uhulumende usemkhankasweni wekuthuthukisa tinhlelo letitawusondzeta uhulumende kubantfu. Ivana beyikhuluma ngesikhatsi ikhuluma ngeluvakasho lwayo lwemave lamathatfu.
Kude live laseSwatini lichubeke lithuthuke ngetinkhundla, hulumende usebenta lihlelo lokuhlanganisa tinkhundla na hulumende wemadolobha kude kugcine kwakhiwe nemitsetfo itinkhundla Local Government Administration Bill letawubona kutfutfuka kwelive sukela phansi emimangweni nasetinkhundleni. Kunelibandla ke letindvuna tembuso lelisebenta lomsebenti. Lelibandla ke liholwa indvuna yelitiko letinkhundla nekutfutfukiswa kwato. Umhlonishwa Sikhumbuzo Dlamini livakashele emave lamathatfu elivekati le-Afrika lokulive leKenya, Uganda kanye neZambia kwetsekela lwati. Indvuna yelitiko letinkhundla iyachaza kutsi yini lababuya nako eveni.
Sifike satfola loyo ukuthi kumqoka lokuthi vele lo hulumende mbamba kungabi ngumlomo lokuthi kufuneka ayele kubantfu. Lo hulumende nathi si concludeile noma ke sivumelene vele lokuthi kufuna vele agcine asuke ngalokuphelele embabane ahambe ayele phasi kulabantfu kulamaswati. Nakahamba lo hulumende ayale kubantfu kufuna sikuconze kahle ukuthi usho ukuthini lokho. Singathi masithi uhulumende uyahamba yakubantu sesisho ukuthi asisafuna tinkhundla. Kodwa sisho ukuthi le tinkhundla kufuna tisukele embabane tihambe tizivele yofika lemphakatsini ngoba tinkhundla tikhungelwe emiphakatsini. Asitshele kona lokuhamba embili bafike bathi hey nina bakangwane kwekucala singakusho sicela ukuthi imane nisetfalela inkulumo niyimixe kuyimbubo emhlaba niyawusibongela lokuthi ikugcine naku liyakukhanza lamasiko nemhambo yemaswati bathi live ngaphandle ukuthi ligcine lokho kude lapho lingaya khona bathi nathi la sikhona khona sesiyasho lokuthi awube kunene bohusifucala bohulumende bethu lokuthi aseniyawuthekela kangwane ukuthi bakugcine njani lokho lobungibo babo singabiyela njani thina ngalokuphelele bathi nyalo hawu sesimapansula nje siyafuna kuba ngiko but nangalapha sibanjwe ngumoya yangesheya kodwa siyafuna bangilokwethu
Lelibandla kubheka ukuthi lakhe umbiko logcwele ngalolu hambo kude livela seSwatini lichubeke lithuthuke liyembili ngato tinkhundla etinzabente eSwatini TV kubika Samkalswe Khoza Sembabane.
Itiko letisebenti liyayisebenza indzaba yokumisa ema-order empahla leyagcine engakefika itiko lebekabita 4 million emalangeni lokhu kuvetwe ngumabhalane lomkhulu kuleli tiko makhosini emdawo ngesikhathi leli tiko livele ngaphambi kwelikomiti lelibuke kusebenta kwetimali tembuso ephalamende i-Public Accounts Committee.
Ngesikhathi litiko letisebenti nenhlala kahle yato livele ngaphambi kwelikomiti lelibuke kusebenta kwetimali tembuso ephalamende i-Public Accounts Committee PAC lisekela lemcwaningo mabhuku kahulumende samkele motsa wetfulele lelikomiti tindzaba tekusebenta kwemali yahulumende kuleli tiko lokumele kutsi leli tiko litisebente njengokujuba kwalo likomiti lelibuke kusebenta kwetimali tembuso ephalamende lephalamende li11.
Paragraph 203 unrecovered or unretired toll advances and over retired toll advances. Ema-toll advances langazanga retire labengaka retire nakuvala umnyaka wa 2022 befika ku 461,173.32 bese lawo mhlawumbe labeka bonakala ngazuthi seka retire eca abe ngu 90,632.18 sihlalo lena yi audit query lephinzekako sihlalo beyikhona nga 2022 yaphinze yachubeka nga 2023 uyikhulumisile controlling officer nga 2023 cha na paragraph 2 for accounts payable treasury and stores nayo yi audit query che la ikhulumisile ngaye 2023 ihambelana netimali letibhatalwa in foreign currency exchange lekuthola ukuthi bese akasendeke kahle ma reconciliation bese tisalete yalenga nje
lisekela lasihlalo waleli komiti Manzizwane ubese ucela mabhalane lomkhulu kuleli tiko makhosini emdawo ukuthi seketfulele leli komiti lehloniphekile ukuthi leli tiko selihambe lefika phi ngekumisa ema-order lagcina ngekefika etiko lalinganiselwa ku 4 million emalangeni.
Yes, Chair, we're able to decommit lama commitments which were outstanding, Chair. With only 513,000 emalangeni 276 now remaining, Chair. Ngumsebenzi lochubeka kolona, Chair. Sitawuchubeka sik-update ngawo as and when uchubeka, Chair. Sesikhonile kusuka kulo 4 million sesiku 513, Chair.
Leli komiti ke libe selikhutsata lona litiko ukuthi letfule endlini nasemakomitini lafanele imibiko yanjalo ngekota ngalendzaba yema-order lagcina ngakefiki khona etiko. Etindzabeni eSwatini TV kubika Samkalswe Khoza ngasimuva Shongwe naThemba Shabangu ePhalamende.
Ikomiti lelibuke kusebenta kwetimali tembuso ephalamende i-Public Accounts Committee lithi litiko letisebenti nenhlalakahle yato aliyikweleke imali leyabhadalwa tisebenti letimbili letasebenta sikhatsi lesengetiwe i-overtime. Lamalunga bayakhuluma ngesikhatsi leli tiko livela ngaphambi kwaleli komiti ngemsombuluko.
Ngane kuleli tiko Anton Masilela
Emalungiselelo emicimbi we-M10 Bushfire savela sazingeni lelisetulu njengoba kubheke ukuthi lo mcimbi wendeke kule mphela-somvo lesiya kuyo. Jigsthorne lobukelo mcimbi uthi kubheke ukuthi i-Bushfire ifaka imali lenganga 100 million emalangeni emnothweni welive lakangwane kulomnyaka.
Umcimbi we-MTN Bushfire uhlanganisa abantu labachamuka etindzaweni letehlukene emhlabeni jikelele. Kanzi nalonyaka lo mcimbi utawendeka eHouse on Fire eMalkens kulembela sondvo lesiya kuyo. Jigston lomunye webasunguli be-MTN Bushfire uthi bakhonile kwakhela eMaswati imisebenti lengu-1000 ikakhulu kubantu labachamuka kalobamba lomdzala.
Team that puts on this event have been working for over a year. At the height of bushfire and roundabout now, we have over 1,000 Emaswati working at the festival. A lot of those people are coming in from the local community, Lobamba Lomdzala. We do amazing things for what we call the creative economy. This year in 2024, I would imagine it's well over 100 million. So this is money that is going back into the economy. These are people who are cooking on the side of the road. These are accommodation establishments. These are people who are selling product on the side of the roads. These are your retail outlets, petrol, you name it. Everybody benefits from the incredible influx of people into the country.
Kanzi ke lo mcimbi uphinze uvulele bosomabhizinisi labancane emathuba ekukhangisa imikhiqito yabo kude batawukwakha imali.
Siniwe phela ukubona abantu bafike bathatha imali embikwethu state lamakhaya sisebenza kubelungu. But this time it's angiphumele ngibambele mina myself.
Nalamabhizinisi nabrother lakhona asitha manje ngobhuti lapha ngoba siyakhona ukufuza timbo sibone ukuthi yini nasikwende kahle kahle empilweni. Kunalo uganga mali sita kakhulu.
Jigs uvete nekwakuthi amathikithi alo mcimbi asavela aphelile lobe kafuna kulithenga sotawuzabe ingcenye yalo mcimbi eminyakeni lotako.
MTN Bushfire 2024, take the malakwane to Imbabane.
Etindzabeni ngingipho kuhle Dlamini ngise-Malkens.
Kwemidlalo mengameli wenhlangano yemidlalo esibhakela lapha eveni uthile izingalo lomdlalo kuleli likhomba kuphakama sibili kule minyaka lemine leyendlulile lapho khona dinombolo dalabangenela lomdlalo dikhombe kunyuka njengoba kube nemacembu lamabili lakhona kumelela live emidlalweni yangephandle aphinze akhona kuthola timendlela letahlukene. Ukhele uthi kusalungiselelwa kuqala iminyaka lemine lemisha enhlangano yekhutsata yamacembu alomdlalo ukuthi yachubeke nekutimisela. Satephetsa ngaleto temidlalo sitabahlola temakethe sitabuya sichubeke ungayinzawo.
Be sure to catch Business Watch every Wednesday between 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. where we feature the latest updates on business news, market trends, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders, as well as insights on emerging small and medium enterprises in the commercial sector. Business Watch, your business leader.
Kwamukela lihlelo sitaqhubeka nalo lihlelo lethu kulesikhathi sanyalo sitawubuka ibriefing lebuya Antonio Guterres from the United Nations, who is the Secretary General. Endzabeni ke ukukhulumisa ku strengthenisha the role of the African state eku-addresseni ke tindzaba tayo i-global security nendzaba tentfutfuko tinsaya leti bangela ukuthi intfutfuko ihambe kancane.
Excellencies, Africa is an important voice for the global good. The continent is home to many examples of unity and solidarity in a fractured world. We see this unity in Africa's focus on ending poverty and hunger, supporting refugees fleeing across borders, and achieving sustainable development. And we see it in the continent's efforts to work together to build a modern, diverse, innovative, and powerful continental economy to benefit all Africans. From the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the African Continental Free Trade Area, To African countries leading the way on renewable energy systems like solar and wind, a continent with the potential to become a renewable energy superpower. To Africa's bold calls for reforming the global financial architecture so it better serves and represents the countries who need it most. Mr. President, all of these efforts require peace in Africa and beyond. Too many Africans are caught up in the hell of conflicts or living with the relentless danger of terrorism and violent extremism in their communities. From the countries of the Sahel, rocked by unconstitutional changes of government, uncertain political transitions, and the growing terrorist threat, to the spread of terrorism and violent extremism in the Lake Chad Basin, Somalia, and elsewhere, to the continued violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Horn of Africa, and to the deepening humanitarian nightmare in Sudan, now entering its second year, with increased hostilities in Al Fasher opening an alarming new chapter in this conflict. My personal envoy, Mr. Ramtan Lamamra, is working tirelessly on mediation efforts with all parties. We need a concerted global push for a ceasefire, followed by a comprehensive peace process to end the bloodshed. The death, hunger, disease, and displacement fueled by these conflicts are playing out against a bleak backdrop. Many African countries are still suffering the impact of the pandemic, including higher rates of debt, limiting their capacity to fight poverty and hunger. Meanwhile, climate impacts are escalating, including droughts and ferocious flooding, as we saw recently in East Africa. Rising geopolitical tensions are also having an impact on the continent. In some countries, we see grave human rights violations and abuses, an epidemic of gender-based and sexual violence, a flouting of international law, and a global climate of impunity. The human cost of these conflicts is breathtaking, and the cost to development is incalculable. Mr. President, now is the time to unleash Africa's peace power. We need to strengthen Africa's peace leadership on the continent itself and on the global stage. First, we need peace in Africa itself. Our partnership with Africa is based on the clear perception that we must work with the African Union based on the principle of African-led solutions for African problems. The United Nations fully supports Africa's pursuit of peace through the African Union's flagship Silencing the Guns initiative. We stand shoulder to shoulder with our African partners to ensure security, stability, and respect for human rights and the rule of law across the continent, in line with the new vision for the rule of law. We are working closely with the African Union to strengthen the foundations of stable, peaceful societies, including democratic processes and institutions that people can trust. And we are working closely with the African Union, ECOWAS, and others to end the scourge of terrorism, including support for prevention, legal assistance, investigations, prosecutions, reintegration, rehabilitation, and human rights protection. We finally support the establishment of the African Humanitarian Agency to help people caught within complex emergencies. And we are supporting key processes to build peace in places where it is in short supply. I'm pleased that this Council agreed to our long-standing call to support African Union-led peace support operations, including peace enforcement and counter-terrorism operations, with mandates from the Council and through assessed contributions, covering a large chunk of the expenditure. Resolution 2719 is a critical milestone. Our two organizations will be developing a joint roadmap to take forward this important breakthrough. Partnerships like these are central to the new agenda for peace. The agenda connects the dots between investing in development, building strong governance structures and justice systems that people can trust, and creating sustainable peace. The African Union and the United Nations will continue working together to diffuse conflicts before they escalate, manage them effectively when they occur, and build sustainable peace when they are resolved. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, second, we need to embed African participation and leadership across the global peace and security architecture. Following the Second World War, the mechanisms of global governance, including this council, were designed by the most powerful countries of the time. Many African countries were still in the process of throwing off the shackles of colonialism. Since then, the world has changed, but global institutions have not. Today, African countries continue to be denied a permanent seat at the negotiating table, including at this very council. The impact of these structural inequalities are plain to see. African states suffer disproportionately from the effects of conflicts, an unjust global financial system, and the climate crisis. At the same time, African countries are stepping up and contributing to peaceful solutions beyond the continent. In this connection, I commend Kenya for leading the upcoming multilateral security support mission in Haiti, and other African countries for offering to send troops. Africa deserves a voice in the global peace and security architecture. But Africa's voice can only be heard if African countries can participate in global governance structures as equals. This must include correcting the lack of permanent African representation at this council. It must also include reforming the global financial architecture, especially its handling of debt, so that African countries have the support they need to climb the development ladder. September's Summit of the Future will be an opportunity to push forward on all of these issues, and I've invited all heads of state to attend. I count on African member states to seize the moment and put forward specific proposals aimed at enhancing Africa's representation within all global governance structures. Mr. President, we must be clear-eyed about the deep challenges ahead, but the people of Africa have always risen to the challenges of the day. Peace is the key to unlocking Africa's future for Africans themselves and for strengthening the continent's voice and influence in building peace around the world. Peace depends on African leadership. I look forward to working with this council and with the governments, institutions, and people of Africa in this important work.
Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Joyce told the Security Council that the harm and suffering caused to civilians in 2023 signals an alarming lack of compliance with international humanitarian law as well as international human rights law. This is also an indication that the Council's protection of civilians' resolutions of the last 25 years remain largely unheeded.
This year, we mark 25 years since the Security Council added the protection of civilians to its agenda. We also mark the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, a cornerstone of international humanitarian law aimed at protecting victims of armed conflict. It is an important moment to reflect on the state of the protection of civilians in armed conflict, and to look at action needed to ensure international humanitarian law and the decisions of this Council are upheld and that civilians are safeguarded from harm. Mr. President, it is with regret that I report to you that the situation of civilians in armed conflict in 2023 was resoundingly dire. It was a year in which we saw the horrors of the 7 October attack by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups on Israel, and the intense Israeli military response in Gaza that resulted in death, destruction, and suffering at a pace and scale unprecedented in the recent past. About 75% of Gaza's population has been forcibly displaced. A man-made famine is looming. Thousands of children have been killed and injured in what UNICEF colleagues have called a war on children. An estimated 130 people remain hostage with ongoing concerns for their humane treatment. In April 2023, we saw the eruption of similarly brutal conflict in Sudan, in which tens of thousands of civilians have been killed and injured. Millions of people have been displaced, acute food insecurity has soared, and there have been reports of horrific attacks and inhumane treatment. Conflicts continued to have a grave and lasting impact on civilians in many other places, including the Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Nigeria, the Sahel, Somalia, Syria, and Ukraine. In total, the United Nations alone recorded more than 33,000 civilian deaths in armed conflict last year, a staggering number, particularly given that the actual figures are likely higher, and a horrific 72% increase compared with the previous year. The use of explosive weapons in populated areas had devastating impacts on civilians across numerous conflicts. In Sudan and Ukraine, for instance, United Nations sources indicate that the use of explosive weapons in populated areas was the leading cause of civilian casualties. Across all conflicts, civilians accounted for 90% of those killed and injured when explosive weapons were used in populated areas. Civilians were also severely affected by widespread damage and destruction to critical infrastructure. This disrupted the provision of electricity, water, and healthcare to millions of people. Across 21 conflicts, more than 2,300 incidents of violence and other forms of interference against medical workers, facilities, equipment, transport, and patients were recorded. Forced displacement also remained a defining feature of armed conflicts. By mid-year, a record-breaking 110 million people globally were in a situation of displacement due to conflict, persecution, violence, and human rights violations or abuses. 60% were internally displaced. And conflict was the major driver of staggeringly high levels of hunger. Across 19 conflict-affected countries or territories, 117 million people experienced crisis levels of acute food insecurity or higher. In the middle of this, the efforts of the humanitarian community to support and provide for the needs of civilians was severely compromised by widespread constraints on access. Besides active hostilities and logistical challenges, chief among these were the parties' bureaucratic impediments and unconscionable number of attacks harming humanitarian workers. In 14 conflicts in 2023, not counting the occupied Palestinian territory, 91 humanitarian workers were tragically killed, 120 wounded, and 53 abducted. In Gaza alone, UNRWA lost 142 staff members in the violence between October and December. UNDP and WHO lost a staff member each. I want to take this opportunity to extend my sincere condolences to the families and loved ones of all civilians, including humanitarian workers, killed in conflict this year. Mr. President, the harm and suffering caused to civilians in 2023 signals an alarming lack of compliance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. It also indicates that the Council's protection of civilians resolutions of the last 25 years remain largely unheeded. We must redouble efforts to strengthen compliance by parties to conflict with these obligations. This includes third states taking responsibility for ensuring respect for the rules of war. This entails political dialogue, training, and dissemination of policies and withholding arms transfers where there is a clear risk that arms will be used to commit serious violations of IHL. And whilst some progress was made in 2023, we must continue to strengthen accountability for violations. This must include upholding the independence and impartiality of the International Criminal Court. Mr. President, as the Secretary General sets out in his report, the reality is that much of the civilian harm we see in today's conflicts is occurring even when parties claim to be acting in compliance with the law. It is time to complement existing measures by adopting a more holistic approach, one that considers the perspective of civilians and takes into account the complex, cumulative, and long-term nature of the full range of civilian harm in conflict. We have already seen some important waypoints on this journey. The political declaration on explosive weapons in populated areas and the 2015 Safe Schools Declaration are both good examples of ways that states can commit to the greater protection of civilians in armed conflict, complementing their compliance with international humanitarian law. We urge all states to endorse these instruments and implement them in full. We urge them to follow the steps taken by some national and regional authorities in developing and adopting proactive protection of civilians' policies, processes, and tools aimed at better understanding and mitigating a broader range of civilian harm. And we need states, parties to conflict, UN actors, international and civil society organizations to reflect on how we can further develop and implement the full protection of civilians approach. Mr. President, 25 years on from when the Security Council first discussed the protection of civilians as an item on its agenda, a lot has been achieved. A culture of protection has taken root and a comprehensive protection framework now exists. Security Council mandated United Nations peace operations have protected and saved countless civilian lives. Security Council resolutions on the protection of medical care in armed conflict and on conflict and hunger have given important focus and urgency to these issues. Yet, in too many conflicts, civilians continue to suffer unacceptable harm. The Security Council and member states must demand and ensure compliance with international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and the Council's resolutions. And if it is to have any real meaning for the millions of civilians affected by conflict, it is time to go above and beyond compliance, to strive for the full protection of civilians against the full range of harms they are suffering on our watch.
The High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu, told the Security Council that in the context of the war in Ukraine, importing, transit, producing and exporting states must act responsibly at every step along the arms as well as ammunition transfer chain to prevent diversion, illicit trafficking as well as misuse.
Almost 27 months have passed since the Russian Federation launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in violation of the UN Charter. That represents over 800 days of death, destruction, widespread devastation, and immense suffering for the Ukrainian people. Regrettably, the security situation continues to deteriorate. The escalating attacks on Ukrainian villages, towns, and cities, including, in particular, in the Kharkiv region, have led to more civilian deaths and injuries, as well as massive destruction of civilian infrastructure. Strikes have also been reported inside the Russian Federation, reportedly also resulting in civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. The continued and intensified attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are unacceptable. All parties to any armed conflict have an obligation to protect civilians in armed conflict and to ensure compliance with applicable international law, including international humanitarian law. Let me say it again. Deliberate and direct attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure and indiscriminate attacks, including disproportionate attacks, are prohibited under international humanitarian law. All such attacks must stop immediately. Attention should also be given to the environmental damage as well as the impact on human health and ecosystems resulting from the use of weapons. Turning now to the subject of this briefing, over the last months, the provision of military assistance and transfers of arms and ammunition to the Ukrainian armed forces have continued. Much of the information from governments about their transfers of weapon systems and ammunition to Ukraine is available through open sources. These transfers have reportedly included heavy conventional weapons such as battle tanks, armored combat vehicles, combat aircraft, helicopters, large caliber artillery systems, missile systems and uncrewed combat aerial vehicles, as well as remotely operated munitions, small arms and light weapons and their ammunition. There have also been reports of states transferring or planning to transfer weapons such as uncrewed aerial vehicles, ballistic missiles and ammunition to the Russian armed forces, and that these weapons have been used in Ukraine. I reiterate that any transfer of weapons and ammunition must take place within the applicable international legal framework, including, of course, relevant Security Council resolutions. Reports related to the transfer and use of anti-personnel mines and cluster munitions in Ukraine are deeply concerning. There must be an immediate end to the use of these inherently indiscriminate weapons, which have a devastating and long-lasting humanitarian impact on civilians. Ukraine is now one of the world's most heavily mine-contaminated countries, and it will require decades of clearance efforts with the support of the international community to make sure communities are safe from the threat of mines. Mr. President, the large-scale influx of arms and ammunition into any armed conflict raises significant concerns for peace and security, including as a result of diversion and proliferation even after the conflict has ended.
Yeah, and those were just updates from the United Nations regarding their interventions on geopolitical issues. A lot of talks are still being discussed, unfortunately, and, quite a lot of ceasefires are still being backed, but not so much is happening regarding those ceasefires. But we do hope that they will continue to be steadfast and that all these countries that are currently in wars will finally find meeting grounds and, agree on certain things, and we won't be seeing losses of lives, because that is the biggest discussion amongst all these conversations that the United Nations continues to have. Asibahle lethi sitawubuya sibuke indzaba tangaphandle.
Eswatini National Petroleum Company proudly presents to you the Monday edition of Market View, where business news are reported and analyzed by a cast of experts and correspondents to deliver unrivaled facts and figures from the business world. Catch this edition every Monday at 2 p.m., brought to you by Eswatini National Petroleum Company.
Welcome back. Let's look at international news. Gaza Civil Defense Agency said an Israeli strike killed at least 21 people. This happened at a displacement camp west of the southern city of Rafah on Tuesday. This was days after a similar strike that sparked global outrage. Viewer discretion is advised on the following story.
Overnight Monday and into Tuesday, Israel continued to bombard Rafah. Residents also say that Israeli tanks have rolled into central Rafah and gunfire can be heard in the distance. Israel is pressing on with its offensive, despite the ever louder international opposition.
The pressure from home and abroad towards the Israeli government, which is fighting with all its might to return the hostages, only strengthens the position of Hamas's chief, Yahya Sinwar. Therefore, we cannot agree to them. I would like to clarify, I am not ready to surrender and fold. I am not ready to end the war before all its objectives are completed.
Less than 2 days after Israel's deadly strike on a camp for displaced people in Tel al-Sultan that killed dozens of people and provoked a global storm of outrage, residents said the area is still being heavily bombarded, prompting many who had taken refuge there to flee again. The even less fortunate rushed to hospital.
There were strikes all night, all throughout the night. It didn't stop.
We went upstairs and found my uncle had been killed. And my brother couldn't walk. His bones were coming out of here, and his entire body was covered in blood.
Nearly 1 million have fled from Rafah since the Israeli incursion launched in early May. Before Tuesday's advance, the offensive had been limited to probing around the edges of Rafah, its border with Egypt, and its eastern areas, after the United States warned against a full-fledged offensive in the city and threatened to stop supplying the country with the weapons to do so. On Friday, the International Court of Justice called on Israel to halt its Rafah offensive, an order it has no power to enforce.
Well, it is very unlikely more survivors of Papua New Guinea's deadly landslide will be found. A United Nations agency warned on Tuesday as thousands of residents at risk from further slips were warned to evacuate. Some 2,000 people are feared buried by a massive landslide that entombed a remote highland community in the early hours of May 24.
In the Enga province, Papua New Guinea, villagers mourn a community lost. It's been several days since a landslide consumed the Yambali village in the early hours of Friday morning. While the chance of survivors has faded, still the people persist, hoping to recover the bodies of their loved ones.
We don't know where the bodies are buried, but we won't give up. We will keep going. The large volume of soil and rocks are making it too difficult for us, so we're using manual labor with spades and iron rods to dig. If we're lucky, we will find the bodies. Otherwise, they're buried forever.
Government agencies fear that more than 2,000 people were buried, a death toll far greater than the initial 670 estimated by the UN. These satellite images showed the scale of the disaster, the remoteness of the region, and the landslide covering an area the size of 3 or 4 football fields. Papua New Guinea is a South Pacific island nation off the northern coast of Australia. The landslide occurred in the remote north of the country in a village of at least 4,000 people, some 600 kilometres from the capital, Port Moresby, in the Enga province. The Papua New Guinea Defence Force and international aid organisations have been working to evacuate people and deliver food and water to the region. But their reports from the ground have described the situation as grim, with numerous challenges to relief efforts. Rocks are still falling, soil is still cracking, and water flowing beneath the debris has prompted fears that the ground will slide even further.
If you are the United States, if you ask the United States presidential candidates who's the most religious, chances are both would say, I am. VOA looks at the attitudes and practices of President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump toward matters of faith.
God bless the USA.
For some, a Donald Trump rally is like church.
My faith in Jesus is very important, and I know there's a leader, Donald J. Trump, who was already president, who did a great job when he was in office, who's coming back and will reinstate those values.
The former president's comments on religion,
God is here and God is watching,
resonate with evangelicals and other conservative Christians.
We will protect Christians in our schools, in our military, in our government.
The God, Guns, and Trump, that's probably one of my best-selling shirts and has been for the last 2 or 3 years or so.
But Trump is far from the typical conservative Christian. The former president has been divorced twice. He's being tried on felony charges of falsifying business records, records linked to hush money payments to an adult film star with whom he allegedly had sex. Some analysts say Trump is using the court case to compare himself to Jesus, whom Christians believe died for the world's sins.
Trump has actually borrowed that language lately. We've seen him saying, I'm being indicted for you.
This Bible is the King James Version.
He is not a regular churchgoer, but on his Truth Social platform promoted a Bible for sale. An Associated Press poll showed 8 out of 10 white evangelical Christians chose Trump in the last presidential election. A Pew Research Center survey this year showed black Protestants preferring Biden. Whether it's a Saturday night or a Sunday, President Joe Biden attends Catholic Mass, typically here in Delaware where he has a house, or in Georgetown if he's in Washington. To that, his supporters can relate.
He went to an all-boys Catholic high school, was fairly serious about his Catholicism. He spoke my language.
Biden and the First Lady met with the Pope at the Vatican in 2021. Pope Francis told Biden, the nation's second Catholic president, he could continue receiving Holy Communion, despite his views on abortion. Biden's abortion stance makes it complicated for some Catholics. In fact, the poll from the last election showed Catholics split 50-50 between Trump and Biden.
Well, the number one thing is the pro-life issue. It's been disgusting watching Joe Biden proclaim himself as a Catholic and not standing for preborn citizens of our nation.
When Biden talks religion, he speaks of inclusion.
A universal message of hope, of joy, of love, whether you're Christian, whether you're Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, or any other faith, or no faith at all. It speaks to all of us as human beings who are here on this earth primarily to care for one another.
Overall, Biden practices his faith traditionally, while Trump suggests God is present in his life.
Prosecutors in the trial of Donald Trump will make a final pitch to the jury on Tuesday in their historic pursuit of the first ever criminal conviction of a former U.S. president. Less than 6 months before American voters choose whether to return Trump to the White House, the stakes riding on the verdict are hard to overstate for the 77-year-old personally, but also for the country as a whole.
Is Donald Trump guilty beyond reasonable doubt?
I'm here instead of campaigning.
That's what prosecutors will try to convince jurors today during the closing arguments of the historic hush money case, where they will likely recap key moments from more than 4 weeks of testimony, such as the paper trail of emails and bank statements they claim is behind $130,000 of hush money payments made to porn actress Stormy Daniels. Payments they claim were part of a criminal scheme to influence the result of the 2016 election. Pivotally, the prosecution is also expected to drill down on the credibility of Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen's account and highlight the evidence that they say corroborates his claims that Trump was directly involved in the scheme and even authorised the payments. The defence, on the other hand, just has to sow seeds of doubt in the prosecution's case.
There are some holes in the prosecution's case, and I think both sides here are going to have a shot at a victory. Jury needs to believe Michael Cohen in order to convict, and I'm confident that the defense is going to stand up there and say that. They're saying if you don't believe him, and here's all the reasons you shouldn't believe him, you cannot convict beyond a reasonable doubt.
All 12 members of the jury must be convinced that Trump is guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Their deliberations behind closed doors are expected to be lengthy, and if an agreement cannot be made, the judge could declare a mistrial. All up, Trump is accused of 34 felony counts. Each charge carries a maximum sentence of up to 4 years in prison.
The U.S. assertion this week that Russia has launched a satellite capable of inspecting and destroying other satellites prompted a denial from the Kremlin and concern from United States lawmakers.
New tensions in the conflict between the United States and Russia in space.
Russia launched a satellite into low Earth orbit that we assess as likely a counter space weapon, presumably capable of attacking other satellites in low Earth orbit. Russia deployed this new counter space weapon into the same orbit as a U.S. government satellite.
An analyst in space diplomacy told VOA this is the latest example of Russia behaving recklessly in space.
It very well can be an anti-satellite weapon payload, but the series of satellites from which this payload came from is known for being what's effectively known as a shadowing satellite or an observing satellite. And what it does is gets in basically near orbits to other satellites that it may want to probe or observe.
But the Kremlin called the U.S. announcement fake news and said it would work towards international cooperation in space.
It will prevent turning space into yet another sphere of armed confrontation. We will continue to promote exclusively peaceful exploration of space for the benefit of entire humankind and on equal basis.
Earlier this week, Russia submitted a draft resolution to the United Nations aimed at preventing a space arms race.
It's geared towards reaffirmation of state obligations not to use outer space for the placement of any forms of weapons, including weapons of mass destruction.
The U.S. criticized the resolution, which failed to gain the required votes for passage.
The truth is that Russia currently has several conventional anti-satellite weapons already in orbit, one of which it tested in 2019. Moreover, Russia has repeatedly threatened satellites for targeting with weapons, to include commercial satellites.
U.S. lawmakers concerned this is part of broader problems in the U.S.-Russia relationship.
Russia recently launched a counter-space weapon capable of attacking U.S. satellites. War criminal Putin should be deterred as we support our allies.
It just goes to show that, Russia is engaged in very aggressive tactics.
In November 2021, Russia conducted an anti-satellites weapon test, creating an orbital debris field.
Israel's war in Gaza since the October 7 attack has revived a global push for Palestinians to be given a state of their own. Norway, Spain and Ireland on Tuesday became the latest countries to recognize the state of Palestine, breaking with the long-held view of Western powers that Palestinians can only gain statehood as part of a negotiated peace with Israel. Their move, which has infuriated Israel, brings to 145 out of the 193 UN member states that have recognized a Palestinian state.
It was in 1947 that Palestine had its first chance of being officially recognized as an independent state. It's then that the UN voted a partition plan that would have created two nations, Israel and Palestine. But Arab states and Palestinian representatives believed that the UN's plan was unfair. They rejected it, and Israel alone was recognized. The West Bank remained under Jordanian control for 2 decades, with the Arab coalition hoping to defeat Israel militarily and to establish a Palestinian state in its place. But this failed. And in 1967, the Six-Day War ended with Israel occupying the Palestinian territories of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. In the 1970s, the Palestinians turned back to the United Nations, which declared the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as the official representative of the Palestinian people. In 1987, the First Intifada, or the uprising. It pushed the battle for independence into the spotlight.
Neither Arafat nor other person else can stop this intifada. It will continue, wave after wave, till achieving real peace through establishing our independent Palestinian state.
In 1988, the PLO declared the independence of Palestine. 78 countries recognized it that same year. In the 1990s, Israeli and Palestinian negotiators made a breakthrough with the Oslo Accords. But peace talks collapsed by 2000. As successive Israeli governments cemented their control over the West Bank, building more and more settlements, the idea of recognizing Palestine without a peace deal gained momentum. UNESCO integrated Palestine as a member state in 2011.
Abstención.
The following year, Palestine became a UN observer state. Over 140 of its 193 members have already recognized it. With the current war in Gaza, others, like Norway, Spain, and Ireland, say they too recognize the statehood of Palestine.
Harassment, arrests, declining trust, and economic constraints make the work of journalists in the United States tough. The country's media are mostly free from interference, but the U.S. still dropped 10 points on the World Press Freedom Index in 2024.
Journalists film as police clear protesters from a university campus. Several reporters across the U.S. have been detained or harassed while covering the Israel-Hamas war protests. Such incidents, say experts, have a chilling effect.
If you go to cover a protest and you get arrested and maybe even a little violently arrested and get hurt, you're going to think twice about how close to that story you want to get next time if you think there's a risk that you're going to end up in handcuffs or worse, spend the night in jail.
The number of press freedom violations in the U.S. dropped in recent years, but incidents like a newsroom raid in Kansas, arrests, and subpoena requests for journalist records contribute to the country's 10-point decline on the World Press Freedom Index. Another factor, says Reporters Without Borders, is hostility from some political leaders. Officials should uphold media as an important part of democracy, says National Press Club President Emily Wilkins.
So I would call on our elected leaders to be brave, to speak the truth about the media and the role that it plays in the democracy, and realize that for every time that they villainize reporters and the media as a whole, that is a knock against democracy, and that is something that is making our entire country weaker.
Adding to a tougher media environment are economic issues. Analysts see a growth in so-called news deserts where communities have little to no dedicated coverage. The result is fewer reporters left to act as public watchdogs. Cleveland Plain Dealer reporter Sabrina Eaton says she is one of the only reporters left covering Congress for audiences in Ohio.
we're supposed to be letting people know what's going on, and if nobody is there to let people know what their members of Congress are doing, I mean, I think that's a tragedy.
Noting unprecedented disinformation and distrust toward media, Weimer says reporters have a big responsibility.
We tend to think of press freedom as the rights of journalists, but there's also an element of it that's the obligations of journalists, and journalists have an ethical obligation to provide objectivity, to cover issues fairly, to be transparent, and to hold themselves to account when they make mistakes.
But not all is lost, says RSF. The Press Act, which has bipartisan support in the House and Senate, will offer greater protection to journalists and their sources from government requests for information if enacted into law.
America's oldest Chinatown sustains tradition even as members of the Chinese diaspora continue to spread out and evolve.
Traditions and festivals in San Francisco's Chinatown date back almost 200 years, when Chinese immigrants arrived and settled in this city on the U.S. California coast. Shan Su, originally from China, brought his children here to connect with their roots.
We want them to know where they come from, and to keep the tradition going.
In the middle of all these Chinese-owned businesses is Buddha Exquisite, the Chung family's store, where another Chinese tradition is alive. Shoppers can find paper products to burn ceremonially in tribute to their ancestors.
There's a couple seasons throughout the years that we want to visit our ancestor, and this is what we send them.
Chinatown's 24 blocks include shops, restaurants, schools, a hospital, and social clubs. It's also a place tourists and dignitaries visit. But Chinese people have not always been welcomed in San Francisco. Chinese migrants faced discrimination with the discovery of gold in California's foothills in 1848. Thousands from southern China, faced with poverty and civil war at home, were either recruited or lured to what they called Gold Mountain, to work in mines and railroad construction. Those who remained in California endured a long period of racism. With the completion of the railroads, many Chinese laborers found work constructing over 1,700 kilometers of levees, transforming the Sacramento River Delta into farmland. Drawing on their knowledge from home, they worked on farms and settled in towns along the Sacramento River. One of them is the town of Locke, about 120 kilometers northeast of San Francisco. Chinese settlers from the Guangdong province built Locke in 1915. Hong Kong native Clarence Chu operates 3 museums in town. When he first arrived in Locke almost 50 years ago, Chu was amazed at how traditional culture still lives on here.
To me, though, coming from Hong Kong and so westernized, I thought that I better learn something from them about the Chinese culture.
Once a haven for thousands of Chinese farm workers, Locke's population has since dwindled.
Some of the younger people started to leave because they have better opportunity, go to college, go to get jobs easier in the city.
Today, new Chinese immigrants to the San Francisco area are mostly highly skilled tech workers or students. Many of them live or work south of the city in Silicon Valley. Strip malls catering to Chinese Americans, like this one in Cupertino, can be found throughout Silicon Valley. Here for lunch, Ernie Chen works across the street at Apple headquarters.
The Chinese community, I think, is pretty spread out, so you can find similar shops in many places already.
Still, some Chinese Americans head back to the Chinatown in San Francisco to feel a stronger sense of community.
Africa's Sahel has become the epicenter of global terrorism, prompting nations to intensify efforts to counter the violence through military training. Analysts, however, say addressing economic deficiencies in the region would be more effective than deterrent.
At the Tamale International Airport in Ghana, troops engage in a simulated gunfight. This drill is part of the U.S.-Africa Security Partnership that aims to bolster efforts to combat terrorism in the region.
The most important objective for these exercises is to build partner capacity and
and capability. We focus on things like setting the theater, developing interoperability, and helping our partners to develop those capabilities that are necessary to achieve their security objectives in Africa.
Organized by the U.S. Department of Defense, Flintlock 2024 draws thousands of security stakeholders from Europe, Asia, and about 30 partner countries to Ghana and the Ivory Coast. For 2 weeks, they participate in combat simulations and share intelligence on countering terrorism. Sahel neighbors like Ghana, which has no record of terrorist activity, use these exercises to stay prepared.
We are observing that these terrorists and armed elements, their activities are progressing, and we need to find ways and means to match up.
Security analysts, however, argue that focusing on military responses to terrorism in the Sahel has failed. Despite the deployment of tens of thousands of military troops to the region, such as during France's Operation Barkhane and the United Nations MINUSMA and G5 Sahel Joint Force, terrorism has seen a significant rise. According to the Global Terrorism Index 2024, published by the Institute for Economics and Peace, Sub-Saharan Africa has become the new global epicenter of terrorism, accounting for over 50% of deaths from terrorism in 2023. Mutaru Mumunu Mukhtar, the executive director of the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism, criticizes the militaristic approach.
It elicited a lot of, grievances within the local population. It ignored the realities of the vulnerabilities or the drivers of violent extremism, the issues of human security, the issues of job creation, addressing youth vulnerabilities, marginalization.
Mukhtar says without economic security, the youth become vulnerable and are easily radicalized by extremist groups.
The average young person believes that the IMF engagement with Africa or the local countries are built around conditionalities that prevents them from stimulating economic growth that can allow the state to recruit or create jobs for young people. And so they blame the West.
This sentiment is reflected by increasing calls for African nations to sever relationships with foreign partners. Strained relationships between the US and the nations of Niger and Chad are examples, with the US saying in April that it would withdraw its troops from both, potentially hampering counter-terrorism efforts in the Sahel. The US says it is committed to restoring its relationships based on shared values.
The United States is still discussing how security relations with Niger, for example, will be handled. And we all, and including Ghana and other ECOWAS countries, are concerned about democratic backsliding.
Experts say that if strained relationships and economic deficiencies in the Sahel region are not resolved, military-centric approaches to counter-terrorism are likely to continue.
Benin is on the brink of throwing open its doors to those of the African diaspora who want to claim nationality. If approved, the move would see it join countries like Sierra Leone, Rwanda and Zambia, which grant citizenship to the third-generation descendants who want to reconnect with their roots on the continent.
Delegations from Nigeria, Ghana, Togo and the Antilles arrived to pay their final respects to Mayor Ja, an ecological activist born in the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, who later became Beninese. For years, she fought tirelessly for the rights of Afro-descendants to be granted citizenship in Benin.
It's a 27-year struggle that is about to come to an end, even though Mayor Ja will not see it.
The return campaigner passed away just 10 days before Cotonou announced plans to officially recognize Afro-descendants as Africans. Her husband and fellow activist, Père Ja, says such institutional acceptance would be hugely significant to the African diaspora.
Today, it's truly our nationality that confirms we're returning as African.
Agzaïma Martial is originally from Martinique. After 5 years of residency in Benin, she was recently granted citizenship here by decree.
We have regained our rights. We believe that Benin has made a historic step forward, and it will facilitate the settling and integration of Afro-descendants.
I think that today's relationship between Africa and the Caribbean and the diaspora is a step forward, and this step forward cannot be stopped.
Kamali Nsai is originally from Guadeloupe. but now lives in Cotonou. He says that becoming Beninese would make him more confident about investing more money into his business here.
This will give us more confidence. We'll feel more inclined to do business, not recklessly, but in a safer way.
More than 200 million people of African descent live outside of the continent. Many are descendants of the millions of Africans kidnapped and sent to the Americas in a life of enslavement between the 16th and 19th century. Benin's well aware that today its innovation and prosperity could be boosted by returning Afro-descendants.
That's the end of our international news. Let's go for a net break. We have a couple of more interviews for you after the break.
Be sure to catch Business Watch every Wednesday between 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., where we feature the latest updates on business news, market trends, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders, as well as insights on emerging small and medium enterprises in the commercial sector. Business Watch, your business leader.
Renewal of TV licenses for 2024 is now open. Here is a quick reminder. A viewer's TV license costs 180 emalangeni per device. Other accessories such as decoders and set-top box cost 50 emalangeni per device. For traders and repairers, TV license costs 300 emalangeni per business area. And now, to pay your TV license, use these following methods. You can use MTN Mobile Money with the number 76222000 or dial *007 *3 *7#, or you can use Eswatini Imali. You can pay our TV license at any post office in the country. Another option is you can use any NetBank branch using our TV license account number 119900430037. Don't forget, when paying for your viewer's TV license, reference with your PIN at all times. And when paying for a retailer TV license, reference with your TIN at all times. For more information, call us on 7802-4543 or 34050163 or 34020879. And you can send us a WhatsApp message on 762222000.
Asimzele sinivusele sikuvusele nawo losanza kusivulela besivutile ukuthi isidaba sikhulumisana na Marketing and Corporate Communications Manager enkampanini Eswatini Electricity Company. Tindzaba letimnanzi letivetwe ngiyo lenkampani ukuthi eMaswati onke la nema meters lapha eveni la over 28,000 sebakhonile kuwa reset ngaphansi kwehlelo ETID rollover before the deadline yenyanga yelweti this year. Sona kuve ukuthi ngabe lokhu kwendeke kanjani, sifuna ukukhulumisana naye ekhaya Mavuso sive kabanti nje ngalo lolu hlelo sivusele Mavuso saba ukuthi benathi nomhla extensa kumlo ukuthi it was last year nasokumisele TID rollover program lapho nanicela khona Maswati ukuthi I reset ema meters abo kwemukela ubuchwephesha nje lobusha lobuhambisana nema meters lamasha kumele kuchazela nje kabandana nje ngalo lolu hlelo ukuthi ngabe vele mhlambe benibuke kwendani nanini introducer.
Thank you siyabonga ngaleli thuba. Cha vele kuliqiniso. I think eminyakeni lophelile inkampani yaveta lushintsho lolukhona lwemamitha ikakhulu aka prepaid lokusho ukuthi logesi lomthenga kucala ungakamsebenzisi. Saveta ukuthi emhlabeni wonke jikelele kuneluhlelo lolukhona loluthi onke amamitha kufanele siwashintshe umcondo. Lo mcondo emamitha la kanawo aka prepaid uyaphela ngaNovember kulomnyaka lona. Lokusho ukuthi nakuphela lesikhathi saNovember lo November 24 2024 atabese akasakhoni ku-accepta noma kwemukela emamitha. Siyathi-ke buchwephesha lobukhona emhlabeni jikelele buhlale bukhona buyashintshashintsha. Lamamitha lesikhuluma ngawo bekanemicondvo lo fika kubo 25 weminyaka. Lo 25 weminyaka-ke uyaphela nyalo ngaNovember. Lokusho ukuthi onke emave emhlabeni wonke kungasilo laseSwatini kuphela belibhekeke ukuthi lo mcondo siwushintshe noma singede kululeka lokunye kulamamitha lokhu akuphindze kulaste lomnye 25 years if lokungasingetulu. Lokho bekubita ukuthi wonke umuntu lona prepaid electricity meter akhone ukuthi aconvert noma aboost lo mcondo wale meter yakhe. Savela-ke sakulontsha eminyakeni lophelile sacela emaswatini onke lesadiwe ukuthi aku-prepaid electricity kokuthi akayibambise inkampani kungasi inkampani kuphela nje emhlabeni wonke jikelele ngokuthi si-reset lamamitha adobana lo mcondo lomusha. Lokhu reset-ke vele bekuyi-process ngalokuthi nasisacala besithi thina sitawufika kuwe endlini kakho sitokwentela sikurisethele. Sahamba-ke sadevelopa sasebenzisa buchwephesha kokuthi nelicustomer lingatendela nje lisekhaya njengoba ukhona ukuthi nangabe uthenga gesi utifakele. Ngilapho-ke lasachamuka ne-self-service platform yethu lengu-star bo-8 labangifona hash labo ufike khona uchafade khona ukhetha option 7 lotakuniketa inombolo lekufanele bese utifaka la khatsi kule mitha yakho. Na utifaka kule mitha yakho-ke bese ti-reseta noma tishintsha lo mcondo. Labanetincingo-ke baye bathi ukuthi licingo uthi na ulisebenzisa ukhanze ukuthi namanye ama-applications akasasebenzi sekudzinga ukuthi u-upgrade. Ngilapho-ke kufike ku-prompt khona uthi upgrade. Kodwa lo buciko lokho obukhona njengoba sisho ukuthi bebune iminyaka le-25 lebeyisise khona bekude lelithuba lekuthi ukuvele ukuthi upgradeele. Kulamalanga nje sinema-smart meters. Ama-smart meters nje akadzingi ukuthi uze uyowachafada. Emakhasimende labanye-ke akubonile lokho lakithi even labe sipilota khona ma-smart meters kuletinye tindzawo khona lapho besingadzingi ukuthi sifike kuwe sitokuchafatela noma sikushintshele noma uthole lawo ma-tokens besivele sikwendele ofisi kuvele kukurisethele. Ngilama meter lamadzala lebesidzinga ukuthi uzothola nama-tokens ukuze uwene. I-situation-ke lesikuyo noma lizinga lesisikulo-ke lamuhla lesilijabulelako lesifuna kulibonga nasesiveni kokuthi kulo msebenzi wonke lona sesiwa convert onke noma siwa-reset onke emamitha aka-prepaid. Lokusho ukuthi nalabo lebe bangakakhoni eminyakeni lophelile sisuke kulo mkhankaso-ke eminyakeni lophelile besigadze ukuthi sitawufika ku almost 90% nasivala umnyaka wa 2023. Safika kwabadudane sitena nasicala lo mnyaka lona hawo savele sagocota bekunene sawa reseta almost onke emamitha lo sikhuluma nje nyalo seka resethiwe. Lotawukhanza ukuthi kumbe kune mitha lengaka resetheki akusike ukuthi ayika resetheki noma beyifaulty sashintsha imitha-ke lensha lesifike siyifake nangabe imitha yakho beyifault sesifaka lensha ichamuka sayivele iresethiwe. Ngiko lamanye amakhasimende ayafika athi awu mosimene abanginiketanga leti nombolo bathi angireset. Nangabe bekune fault lebekhona ungaka-reset ukhaya ukuthi imitha yakho ifile bese thina sifika sitokushintshela sichamuke nale sevele iresethiwe.
Kunetinkhulumo babe mavuso noma ke ma-allegations particularly on social media bamfuna baticocela nje ukuthi hayi lokho sesi-resethela ama-meters ethu kwangathi lokho sesogijima kakhulu. Ngabe mangana maciniso kulelo hlangothi lelo lithini vele? Is it possible ukuthi vele gesi yagijima kakhulu manje vele soluhamba kahle bamfu nje bathi khulumela?
Asengicale ngokuthi indlela yethu yama-tariffs energy regulator uye athi nakasiniketa luhla ukuthi gesi ndamthengisa nganayi insengo nayi. Uvele asinete lolo luhla lolo sisebenzise lona kuze kuyophela leyo period noma umnyaka lekasinete kona. Kude kokuthi imitha siyayigodloloda itogijima kakhulu noma ihambe kancane. Akusilo iqiniso lo. Lesikubonako-ke esiveni kokuthi njalo nakunelishintsho uyukhanze ukuthi bese kuba nemathapela ngoti la ufike athi hhayi le nto ayisebenzi kahle buya la ngakimi mina ngidakwentela ukuthi ihambe kancane ngoba laba bashintshe benda kokuthi siyacela-ke siveni kokuthi nangabe kunento le njengaleyo babothathise emagesini bangarelayi kakhulu kuko konke le bantu akuthola ku-social media. Nangabe kunjani hamba kule social media page yasemagazini la utawufika uthole amaciniso akhona lesikubonile-ke sisenda le process lekusitile nakumakhasimende ngoba bekuba khona la bafika-ko bafike bathi ngishaya emagazini si-reset emamitha manje imitha yakho singakwendela sihambe kancane kudawudinga ukuthi ufake lokuncane ukuze sikwendele lokho beku-scam leso bekunene akude lapho kubhadaliswana khona ukuthi sendele reset process lokuconverta nje lamamitha asiwa-resethe bekumahhala ha kungiko lamhla sikhonile ukuthi sifike ku-100% ngalokuthi kude indleko le betifune-ke ukuthi tibhadale likhasimende. Lokunye-ke lesikubonako ukuthi amakhasimende lo sesicale njena ebusika bekasolo athenga gesi ndawubekisa ukuthi bokuthenga gesi nje wa-R200 ngenyanga ukulaste izinyanga iyophela kodwa ngalo sesicale nabo ubusika sekuyabanza lisheshe lishone liphute nekudla lokusho ukuthi i-consumption pattern yakho seyihlukile ngiko-ke makhasimende ungazothatha ubona wathi hhayi ungathi lo 200 le ngomthenga ngenyanga akasangineli ukuze kuyophela inyanga. Nalapho-ke bekunene siyakhumbuta nje ukuthi kude lesikuthinzile ku-tariff yagesi into lehlukako ngile pattern yakho ukuthi noma ngawubilise emanti sekathatha isikhashanyana ukuthi abile kani ngalesikhathi kushisa bekasheshe abile ukhona ekugeza noma wendele leyo tiya lelikhona.
Begcina nje emavuso mhlambe kutsata nje sive samaswati ukuthi sisebenzise le self service platform nje kusho ukuthi *8 labane na hash
sasa kwenda kwabalula ukuthi likhasimende lethu lifinyelele kithi usebenzisa lecingo lakho kuthi ngiphi network lo isebenzisako onke ama networks la khona eveni avumelekile uchafata nje *8 labane na hash bese-ke kukuniketa ama-options la khona ucalela phansi nje kuma-faults letulu nangabe ubika ukuthi ukude egesi noma kunetinkinga letikhona uphinde kube na-option 2 naye lofika avete kokuthi kumbe unenkinga yemitha yakho nalapho ungafika uhlole khona nangabe unenkinga yemitha bese-ke kunalamanye ama-options lafaka ekhathi-ke nangabe bowenda i-quotation yemagesi ufuna ukuthola ibhili naletinye tingoni letikhona nalomunye-ke nangabe kumbe ulahle ama-units ngoba lokunye lesakulalela kumakhasimende kokuthi nangesitolo ngifike ngithengela ama-units agesi bangiprintela na-slip ngithi nangifika lapha esitolo ngisengithenge ne-cold drink yami ngithathe le slip ngisilahle emgconyeni nangifika ekhaya ngithi ngiyaphuthatha ngikhanze kude slip sagesi nalapho awusadingi ukuhlupheka ngoba lo *8 labane na hash ungakhona kuphinde uye lapha kuma-tokens utokhona retrieval ama-tokens lo wasebenzisile kusitile-ke kumakhasimende ngoba labanye bemakhasimende bekakhala ukuthi hey ngithuma umfana la ahamba esitolo ngithi akathenga ama-units a-200 emalangeni nakabuya umfana ngithi ngiyawufaka ama-units ashesha aphele nangithi ngiyahlola lapha kule platform yenu ngikhanza ukuthi lo mfana akathenganga kwa-200 wathenga kwelikhulu lokusho kona ukuthi le platform iyasita ukuthi nawe ulikhasimende ukhona ukumonitor.
Okay, nosibonga kakhulu kuyevakala mbukeli kanzima ngabe kukhona mhlawumbe lofisa ukuva khona enkampanini ungashayela licingo labo ku-25083333 kubuta kabanti kanti ungasebenzisa nayo le self service platform *888# aseselikhefu nasibuya siyixoxisana nebase-Blood Bank.
Eswatini National Petroleum Company proudly presents to you the Monday edition of Market View, where business news are reported and analyzed by a cast of experts and correspondents to deliver unrivaled facts and figures from the business world. Catch this edition every Monday at 2 p.m. brought to you by Eswatini National Petroleum Company.
Hey you!
Yes, you. Have you paid your TV license?
Did you know that by paying for your TV license fees, you will be complying with the laws that govern television possession, in particular the Swaziland Television Authority Act of 1983 and its regulations? It is a legal obligation.
Paying for your TV license can have a positive spin-off, as the money collected from TV license fees goes a long way in assisting Eswatini Television Authority procure appealing and relevant content to broadcast on the channel.
So now, these fees also increase purchasing of local content from independent producers, which helps ensure that the arts and film industry in the country is well supported thus far, ensures the creation of jobs for eMaswati. The payment of TV license fees goes a really long way in such endeavors as well as nation building.
A TV license costs 180 emalangeni per year per device, and for other accessories such as a decoder or njinja, it costs 50 emalangeni per device per year.
By paying for your TV license,
you will be doing the right thing.
Welcome back. Let's have a conversation on health matters now. In this segment, we are delving into a critical issue that affects hospitals and patients worldwide and certainly locally. Nzaba yema blood shortages. Despite numerous blood donation drives and awareness campaigns, many blood banks still struggle to maintain a sufficient supply to meet patient needs. Now, joining us to shed light on this issue is Lunga Njalinjale, a lead blood donor recruiter with extensive experience in blood donation and transfusion services. Lunga, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Inside, it's hitting home. Lapha ekhaya Eswatini TV, we've had instances where even some of our colleagues have had, to go to the blood bank ingadi with urgency. Some of them banengadi lokhanza ukuthi nitsinine irare. Nje kungaba kusichazela first and foremost how critical current blood shortage is, and maybe the impact leba khona in terms of hospitals and patients.
Morning, Mr. Ngumalo. Morning, viewers. Let me try and start somewhere, because to say that there are critical issues when it comes to blood, we first have to understand what blood is,
right?
How blood works. The one thing that is there that we cannot dispute, that science has failed to do, is to produce blood. So in order for you to get blood, someone else has to donate blood.
Right.
So in so saying, I'm trying to say that if there is any need for blood, someone else has to give it.
Yeah.
So then it becomes imperative that everyone who is of age that allows to give blood should have at least give blood once or twice a year. That would then eliminate the word critical in terms of blood shortages.
Yeah. So,
yes.
So umuntu nje kufuna vele, it should be incumbent upon every individual lokhonago, maybe setasichazela ukuthi ngibani lokhonago, ukuthi at least once or twice a year ngathi nje ukuthi nginama appointments ami blood bank ukuthi ngihambe kuyodonate ngadi.
Believe me, Mr. Ngumalo, logo kunga eliminate so many problems when it comes to having ingadi in the entire world.
But it makes me wonder, Mr. Njalinjale, because mina nje ngifundzile primary nase high school and even nase tertiary, I've seen quite rigorous drives. The campaigns that you do, Nima health practitioners, you even came to our schools, the need for leyo ngadi leyo. One wonders, good see, how do we come short of blood supplies with such campaigns la mahlenanga?
It's good that you're asking that question. I may just throw around another question based on that one. Seeing us coming to your school or even tertiary, did you give blood?
I did, certainly.
Wonderful. The thing is that as much as we have these many campaigns that you see us moving around, the problem is that people are not yet inclined to give blood. Guns, it's in we are there, to encourage people to give blood.
Right.
What is needed and what should people know is that in order for you to give blood, you must be at least 16 years of age.
Okay.
If a regular donor, then according to the standards in Swaziland, you give blood up until you are 65.
Yeah.
Your weight should be at least 45 kgs. Then you should be a healthy person. With the absence of illness in your body, you should not be taking any medication in order for you to give blood. Then, of course, there are issues of responsible social and sexual behavior that comes into play.
Yeah.
But if you are 16 and you are above 45 kgs and you are healthy, you are not on any medication,
Yeah.
you are not living with any illness, you are welcome to give blood.
Let's highlight maybe, I mean, the sexual behaviors. I think those are mostly emphasized from primary up until uzube mtsala nanathi siyakhulumisa cishe every day. But the social behaviors, let's are responsible. Maybe let's highlight some of those, because umuntu nje asasuka donating ngadomnye ngatshela ukuthi maybe I'm responsible sexually, but not so much socially. Ngimaphi lawo
Social behaviors, it means, if possible, you should not be taking alcohol. But if you do, there should be a period that you should not have taken alcohol before giving, including smoking cigarettes.
Right.
You should have a few hours before you've had your last smoke before you can give blood. Then recreational drug abuse, then that one disqualifies you from giving blood. Those are the social issues that we are talking about.
Yeah, and certainly I do see how it's quite an urgent issue now. Just, conducting my personal eye study, this is not from any statistic, it's just an eye study. Every Monday I read the newspaper and I was appalled to see the DD list, particularly from the Manzini region alone. The whole country is struggling with it, but Manzini seems to be doing quite a great job, and that's great. That is not on a positive connotation, by the way. Manzini is just, clearly winning the awards of drink and driving, and we discourage that, because that means but I do want us to talk about a critical issue. I often hear you guys talk about shelf life in terms of blood. How does that affect the urgency of this situation?
In terms of shelf life, we always say we need regular blood donors, because blood, once it's been donated, it can only live for a certain period, depending on what we are looking for in blood.
Yeah.
But the unit of blood as a whole has got a maximum shelf life of 42 days.
Wow.
Which means even if you were to come today and say you have 5,000 to give, we'd say we have enough in stock. But after the 42 days, we're back to zero. So what we need is that people should come at different intervals and be regular blood donors to keep the supply steady throughout.
It makes me wonder, I have a lot of questions in my head. Do you, without mentioning a patient's name maybe, provide an example of where a timely blood donation made a significant difference in a patient's life? Because like you're saying, you're highlighting in intervals, just your donator, that is almost counterproductive. Quality obviously expire. But la ukhanza khona ukuthi vele seyikhwale patient lekuthide ngekuta kwethu encenye ngalokushiyelana letikhathi sekusita ke patient, and it was urgent at that moment. You've had examples like that?
Yes, there are examples like that, depending on the wide range. Right. I would put an example of an accident,
right?
Say a car accident. When it comes to blood, we've got different blood groups. There is a blood group that we call O negative. That one means it is a universal donor. Everyone can take it at any moment. That one helps when we're talking about accidents, because if you are coming in bleeding, the time it will take to cross-match your blood, to find a blood type and find the right group, takes longer. But when we have the O-negative blood already in stock, it's easier to just use it whilst you are looking for your compatible blood group.
It's quite interesting indeed. What are some common misconceptions? Because I think our biggest task sitting here today is convincing the viewer at home. to go and donate ngalama intervals lo suggestako Mr. Njanjali. I want us to look at the misconceptions because ngiyakhumbula mina like I'm highlighting that kolweni sithi khanza sonke sesima experts nala ku social media wonke umuntu soyadi soyamanga how nawe so wakufunzela lokho. The question then becomes, what are some of the misconceptions that are there that could prevent an individual to go and donate because maybe sekunananga emanga nanga lesagcwala abangasaliqinisa?
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions.
Right.
People always say sometimes that blood has got other things that are there, like your soul or whatever.
Yeah.
We are dealing with science.
Yeah.
We are not looking into souls and things. When you give blood, we are taking the basic component, which is the blood cells that are needed to give to the next person to help them with their recovery. We don't look at all those things. We don't know what it means actually, because in science it does not have an explanation. The another misconception that is there, Klamalanga, is that we are selling blood.
Yeah.
We do not sell blood.
Why are you selling
blood? Is a donation from someone. It's a gift to the blood bank for the nation. The people that are getting the blood are not buying it at the same time.
Yeah.
So we cannot be selling blood. So that is a misconception that we need to put out there and say it is not true.
Yeah.
We are saying blood donation, it means it's a free process from the donor, which is the person who's giving, to the person who's receiving, which is the patient.
Yeah.
For me, I'm just in the middle, facilitating the process of getting the blood from you to the patient. So no monetary value is attached to anything there.
Yeah, it's quite interesting indeed. I want us to, go back to and circle back to what you mentioned earlier in terms of, becoming regular blood donors. You did mention that at least once or twice a year. And then you said, in terms of, the lifestyle, my social behavior and my sexual behavior should be one that is recommended by health practitioners. Ngiyafuna lo ukuthi sibuyele kancane kuloko because lo munye umuntu uyadibuta lo ukuthi I want to be a regular blood donor. I do see lo ukuthi lo once a year kungathi maybe it's not enough. Maybe kufuna sisalo sibamba lo 2 ababe njanjali vele amaswati ayadzinga lo ukuthi aphile regardless of the shelf life. Ingadi yami ngeke ngive ngathi ya wasteka. Ngomaphi lama practices lengawa practice for me to become a regular blood donor, at least as big as threshold here twice a year?
Okay. Mr. Ngumal, thank you. Lo once or twice a year, that applies to when all of us is giving.
Right.
What is actually there is that as a male in this country, you are supposed to be giving blood after 3 months.
Wow.
Which becomes 4 times a year.
Yeah.
As a female, you are supposed to be giving blood once every 4 months, which becomes 3 times a year. So for you to be a regular donor, if you can try to match those periods, then we'd be even more happy.
And that means, of course, I should try and lead a healthy lifestyle. Go to the gym if I must. Balanced.
You have to eat good balanced at all times. Try to drink a lot of water, and make sure that your food has these green leafy vegetables, these food that are rich in iron and vitamin D. They do help in the production of blood, especially after giving.
Yeah.
Because your body has to recuperate and then regenerate again quickly.
So Njanjala, I've been asked to wrap up, but I will give you this moment to look straight into that camera and just talk to the viewer at home and encourage them to come and donate.
Okay. Thank you. If you are at home, we are requesting that if you can, at any time, please do come by and donate. We have 3 places that we call static centers that you can come to and donate. We have one in Mbabane, just below Mbabane Government Hospital. We are open on Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 16:45, which is 4:45 in the evening. We have one in Manzini. Now it's open on Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:45, next to Emapoiseni, opposite the Summer Place Complex. Nendas kwaseposini. Ehlatikulu Government Hospital, sesivulile endla uma uya e-OPD. Utawubona kunema signs la show ukuthi Eswatini National Blood Bank. Nakhona siyavula umsombuluko kuya kuLesihlanu. Ningeta noma nini kude lo ncabelekile ukuthi anga donate. So you come uma ngabe kunemibuto, we are always open. You can come to us ubude noma usibona lapho sime khona. Please do come and give blood. Kunginyalo nje siyaphuma siye etikolweni sicele tingadi kubantwana bethu. kodwa-ke kuhamba divalwe itikolo bese sethi khanza siside lama-donors ethu lesithembele kiyo. That is where sibese sicela khona kakhulu ukuthi sive asesibambise sivale leto tikhala leto.
Sinjalo, thank you so much. Siyabonga kakhulu isikhathi sakho lomhla ekuseni Maswati Lamahle. Sethembe ukuthi sevele endaweni kanjalo nebenkosi lenhle ngase ngivele ngigitsa ligogweni nangaphinza lokulakushoko sithi abahloli market sibuye sibhale ihlelo nemfombela.
Be sure to catch Business Watch every Wednesday between 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., where we feature the latest updates on business news, market trends, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders, as well as insights on emerging small and medium enterprises in the commercial sector. Business Watch, your business leader.
Benkosi lenhle sengiwo-ke maphethelo elihlelo lethu lalomuhla siba kakhulu ukuthi nihleli nathi nalomuhla themba ukuthi litawuba nathi nakusasa kodwa nje lokukhulu lamhla ukuthi nichubeke nibukele Donut inhlelo lomsakazo wetitfombe Eswatini TV lotawuchubeka aniphe dona lomuhla nibe nesuku loluhle kakhulu sale kahle.